Welcome back to Fire Emblem Thracia 776. This is Chapter 13, which is the setup for one of the more notorious chapters in the game. This is getting to the culmination of the Tara arc here, which is something that's kind of discussed at first in like an offhand way in this game, and then it becomes part of the actual plot, like the most important part of the middle game, basically. This is kind of a boring chapter in some ways, especially on replays. Like once you know how to go about it, it's really you can complete it quite surgically, honestly. But I'm going to show you some funny things about it, just in kind of a incidental way. I didn't really go into it thinking that I was going to show you funny things, but that's just how I play this chapter these days. So you get introduced to Dean and Glade here, who I like to pronounce sometimes like it rhymes with Sade, like the singer. Don't ask me why I do that, so if you hear me say Glade, that's why. Anyway, Glade is Selfina's husband, so if you want that other item that I was talking about several chapters ago, you have to bring Selfina and have her talk to her husband, Glade. This is the second or third, depending on how you look at it. Not so much in this playthrough where I skipped the Chapter 11 Ballista, but in general this would be the third time you would encounter Ballista, and they're not too bad here, and I'm going to show you a reason why they're really not after a certain point in the map. So I did bring Karen. I almost always bring Karen to this map. She's useful, especially if you want to go for some stretch goals. There's a bishop in the lower left. You know, that bishop, that pesky bishop with the siege tome and everything. You can capture him and then visit a house for a night proof. I'm not going to do that in this run, but that's something you can do. It's not that house that you just saw there. It's like farther down into the very lower left. But yeah, you got to be careful where you put her. You got to check ranges, and you're going to see her sitting in that spot right there for a while. But it's good to bring a small group. I don't think the maximum deployment is very high. In fact, this might actually be the max deployment. There's even these bow knights here, so Karen can't even sneak around the side. If you give her the leg ring like I did, and she also has decent weapon rank, and maybe a few skill or strength procs, maybe she can deal with a ballista. Because with the leg ring, she has enough move to get from out of their range and into their minimum range, beneath that threshold. But if you do that with just an untrained Karen with extra move, she probably won't even be able to damage them. Especially since sometimes the ballista are actually on terrain. They're usually on plains, but I think in chapter, what was it, 10 or whatever it was, where you know, the chapter that I hate, I think the top right ballista is on a mountain, which really sucks. But, you know, whatever. Them's the breaks. We're going to try to avoid Ballista as much as possible. And the best way to do that in this map is just go really fast and have your promoted mounted units just charge them. Because this isn't one of those maps where they actually group up the Ballista in such a way that even strong units have trouble with it. It's if you have promoted Finn, promoted Fergus with enough, because this Fergus that I had was actually pretty defense blessed, so I can charge him into these kinds of situations fairly reliably. You got to be careful with Selfina, of course. I forget if I do it on this run. I don't think I do, or, well, we'll see. But, she's so vulnerable that you might actually want to dismount her and carry her across this terrain, especially with, these bow knights are essentially ambush spawns, so you can forget to factor them in. As you'll see here, the Leonster, unnamed random units. Those aren't like Cain and Alva. They're not like real units. They're just like nameless guys who each have a weapon. What I always do is trade over their weapons to Glade, and he hangs on to them while sitting on the gate tile, which makes him not invincible, but it's a very, very low chance that he will get crit twice. And I don't think that two guys with battle axes can even target him twice in the same turn, so that buys you a little extra time if he does somehow get crit. But I've never had it happen. I've never had a disaster there. He's pretty strong as it is, and that gate tile makes him like pretty much invincible. So he can't hold out forever, especially because the boss starts moving after a certain point, and there's also mages, which could potentially be an issue. They're pretty weak overall, but they do magic damage, so you know, it's not good to tarry forever. I mean, there's not much to do in this zone anyway, so you don't really have a reason not to just keep charging, even if you play slowly. Let's see. There's like kind of this strange mechanic here. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I don't know if I've talked about like unit affiliation too much. So let me bring up something kind of unrelated first. In some chapters, like for example, 4X or 4 Gaiden, when you recruit Asbel, he actually doesn't get Leaf's leadership bonus, like inherent leader bonus, the authority stars, for that chapter because he's still considered part of the Magidan, or the Magi squad, as it might be called in English, or something like that. He's still considered part of Seti's group for the purpose of that chapter, and that the same is true of a unit or two in the next chapter. So that whole thing, which might seem like cosmetic in the stat screen, which it is in a lot of games like Radiant Dawn, it's like more or less cosmetic, I think, or like it's not cosmetic in Radiant Dawn, but there's like another thing that like messes it up and like makes it a wasted mechanic. But like in some other game, I know there's like it doesn't matter, but in this game it does, and that also affects enemy AI in some weird ways sometimes. In this map, that boss that I was talking about that moves. Once you kill him, not only do the units get weaker because they have less hit and avoid from that guy's leadership, if he has any. I'm not entirely sure if he does. Then they all lose morale and run. And that actually, believe it or not, applies to the ballista as well, and you're going to see how that's true. I'm going to end up putting Karen like in ballista range after that boss dies, and it's going to be totally fine. Now, you're probably thinking, or you may be thinking that that's too scary, even consciously knowing that, and I totally understand that. It's very scary, even when you know for a fact to go and do that. But you know, I've toyed around with this chapter enough where I'm confident with it, although it still doesn't feel good. It's like you feel like you shouldn't be doing it just as a best practice sort of deal. But I don't know, it's just another one of those things that makes Thracia great, just these like strange ways that AI is handled. Makes every playthrough different, you know. But these Leonster Knights aren't totally useless. You're going to see. What they can do is rescue and drop your guys into different spots, like freeing up people like Fergus and Finn who might otherwise have to do that. You can give people like Tanya here a boost, although she has, you know, 3 extra points of movement off base, so I'm not sure that she needs it per se, but you know what I mean. They can actually visit villages, and I mean, they don't, I think they you have to like trade the stuff off of them. I don't think it automatically goes to the convoy, but I haven't tested that. But they can do those kinds of like minute tasks for you if that'll save you time. You'll notice that I have the elite sword on Leaf actually, and it's actually, this is another like niche use for it where you can use it as just a random defense boost if you're getting pelted by ballista fire. In like slower playthroughs, especially like gimmick ones, like the no guidance run, there were actually chapters where I had to put the elite sword on like Xavier and just have him soak up tons of ballista shots, which was not only miserable but just like totally unclean. And I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but you can apply this principle in less stupid ways. You know, you can just use it to keep a unit alive that otherwise might take too many ballista hits or whatever, and you didn't really foresee it. It's just good to have it on like a weaker unit, even if they're not going to be doing much fighting necessarily. But this is the juncture here where you can start attracting the boss if you want. I'm not sure that I do it on this turn because I was a little afraid for Fergus, especially with these mages coming up. I forget if they have fire or thunder, because like thunder has a little bit of extra crit, and I probably have a scroll on both Fergus and Finn, but I don't know, that it gives them a little bit more attack power as well, so it might end up being a little bit too much for Fergus. But like this is a good place where, because these Bow Knights are part of that group that runs once the boss dies, but before then you can have like a 2-range unit like Tanya, just hold them off and gain some extra experience. Like I said, it can be dangerous for Selphina. Selphina is more of like a player phase focused unit, I would say, because she has a cost, and just because like archers and weaker units in general are just player phase focused, like to begin with. So, you know, whatever. The other thing that happens is once the main force starts running, another stronger group starts funneling in from the very top, and they're not like hellaciously strong, but you do have to, and they never really stop coming until like turn, you know, 1,000,000 or something. So you do kind of have to get out of there after you kill the boss, which luckily it's just, you know, a pretty easy escape maneuver. So the only impetus for staying is to visit that lower left house, or if you're especially greedy, you can, you know, grind off of these extra units. But one thing I would be careful about is getting your best units fatigued, because next chapter you definitely want to have the A squad. There's ways to play it that, not getting too much into next chapter now, but there's ways to play it where you don't necessarily need your A squad. You can just kind of position yourself in a way that makes it kind of trivial, but like for most styles of play, especially if you're going into it with no foreknowledge, you probably want to make sure you have at least like 75%, 80% of your best units available. And you might have a couple stamina drinks lying around at this point, especially if you were able to capture those thieves in chapter, what was it, 10? But it's good to save those, especially for like staff units, which I wouldn't bring too many of those to this chapter, by the way. Sometimes I bring Nana, but it's not so necessary. You can probably just get by with a couple vulneraries. Nana is probably pretty vulnerable, even though she's like your most durable dedicated healer and your most mobile one. So if you must bring one, you can bring her, but I probably wouldn't unless she's like promoted, and in which case she might be one of your better combat units anyway. definitely use up that earth sword. It has so many uses. Once these guys start running, you can like capture a couple of them if you have time. Maybe if you left the weapons on the Leonster Knights, they could help with that. Although I think that that's a waste of time, honestly. I like to just put the weapons on Glade, and that pretty much gives you enough lances for the rest of the game. Because remember, you can't use lances indoors, so, and like, the last like few chapters, like 3 or 4 chapters in the game, are all indoor, and a lot of the big chapters coming up are also indoors. Like chapter, what is it, 19? The Xavier chapter is an indoor chapter. So it's really kind of overkill, like, making sure that you have all of these guys' weapons. And here you're seeing me do like a trade chain with that hammer that I got out of that village. Not the most useful weapon. It's most useful in the next chapter, actually. It's like, the most armor knights you'll ever see in a map. But this is where Karen can just go free range. See, she's going to have to canto into a tile where she could potentially get hit by that ballista. So watch as she does not die. And here you see that this guy is a bolting, which is kind of cool if you have Olin trained up, or if you're planning on getting Ilios later. But it's really not worth the extra time, especially when these stronger units start funneling toward you. And there's another reason why I'm not really going to need it that I was already thinking about here. We'll get to that later. But for our last little bit here, let's talk about a few things in regard to Glade. Number one, you should know that I went over this a little bit in the last or the chapter before last, where I was comparing him to Fred. He's kind of one of these like pedestrian-seeming, promoted mounted units. In this case, Glade is, like just Finn, basically. He's like the already promoted version of Finn, meaning he only uses lances, to my knowledge. But he's good. He gets like a humongous support bonus from Selfina, so using them together is pretty solid. He gets like 20 avoid and like 20 extra hit, and his base skill is pretty high, so you'll find that he actually crits a lot for a guy that you wouldn't think really would crit so much. I definitely recommend using him wherever you can. I think he even has a leadership star, which makes him like a good filler unit in indoor maps. Just get a little bit of an extra bonus, as long as you don't, especially need him to be mounted for the very next chapter or what have you. Couple things in regard to the story. There are like a bunch of talk conversations you can have here with him, with Finn, Leaf, and Selfina. And one thing I want to talk about is that doesn't really relate directly to the Japanese version so much, is that the conversation that he has with Selfina is actually different depending on whether or not you've already talked to Glade with Leaf. Believe it or not, if you talk to him with Leaf first and then with Selfina, there's this extra little bit that's interesting where he talks about how Leaf resembles his father, Kian. So that's cool. You should try that, or like save state and see the differences sometime if you play it. And another thing is that I don't trigger it here, but if you have the Finn conversation with him, he actually refers to Finn at the rare, respectful version of Kisama, which is like kind of jarring if you're used to it just being used as like an anime like pejorative, basically. So that's kind of funny. If I had realized that, I probably would have tried to trigger it just for the sake of the video. But if you ever play this in Japanese, you can try triggering that, or perhaps someday I'll make another recorded playthrough of this again, and I'll trigger that. But I really don't have much else to say about this chapter. Trying to make sure that nobody is dismounted when you escape from here. Just because it's... I mean, you have some time before you have to engage the enemy in the next chapter, but it's just better if you're able to get set up right away, especially in the case of like your like Karen, for example. You might want to have her get ready to visit some houses. This is especially true of Nana as well. Although you might have to, if your Nana's kind of weak, you might have to employ some tricks there. I will try and remember to go over that when we go into that chapter. So yeah, I'm not going to spend time screwing around here. Enjoy the last little bit of the video. We will be back with chapter 14, basically like one of the, not like the climax of the game, but it's definitely a high watermark point for many people. So I will see you there. It's going to be fun, maybe, sort of. Thanks for watching.